you want to stand near them, whoever's more comfortable, and you can address the audience.
Okay, so you can hear me loud enough?
Yeah, I'll get you in here.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm good.
Welcome to the first of our summer artist talk series. Today we have Melissa-Cowper Smith and Jessica Mongeon. They share an appreciation for nature that is expressed through their artwork. They are also transplants to the region who have made Arkansas home. Cowper Smith was born in Alberta, Canada, and Mongeon was born in North Dakota. Cowper Smith wrote, quote, "Through my art, I explore a material connection to nature. I use plants I've grown to make handmade paper. On the paper, I add photography, paint, and plastic beeswax. Cowper Smith's depictions of nature are at times welcoming and at others threatening, stating, in this work, nature is both loved and feared." And I'm going to welcome the artists who will also introduce themselves further. So, welcome.
Thanks. All right, I'll let you go first.
Okay, thank you for coming. It's a strange time for this, so I appreciate you coming. I'm going to tell a little story about how I started making this work in my own mind. So I was raised by a child psychologist who was very into like letting their kids explore things. And so when I was a kid, she wanted me to make some art, and she had no rules, and I could be as messy as I wanted. So she put an easel outside and gave me all sorts of paints and was like, go ahead and paint. So what I did was I looked at some flowers and landscapes in the garden, and I started to paint them. So you can tell which works are mine kind of already, although we both have flowers. And I started to paint it, and I was really bad at painting flowers because flowers are incredibly beautiful. You know, when you look at them and they're like the velvety texture and the little beads of water, and they're just so beautiful. And I wanted to capture that because if you just make like kind of a flat, ugly flower, it's like never quite, do you know what I mean? It's like very frustrating to paint nature and not get it right. And so I was like, no, but it's not quite right. So I actually took the flower and I glued it to the canvas, and I just started sticking it on there. And then once I did that, I was like, oh wait, you can take anything from the garden and stick it onto the canvas. So I don't know how old I was, probably 10, 11, and I'm just taking dirt and flowers and sticking them on the canvas and making paint and then like making this mess. That painting stayed in my house in the entranceway for the rest of my growing up. So when I graduated in 18, like I had my prom picture with that painting. So I feel like the work I make now is pretty much the same. I make paper from plants in my garden. So that's the base layer. I take leaves and flowers and all of those things, and I put them into the paper, and it dries in the paper. And then on that paper, I print photography that I've taken from also either my garden, or sometimes I go to fires or start fires in my yard, because I really love how fires transform things. They also burn paper and burn the same materials I'm using. And so I've taken pictures of storms and clouds and other things, anything from nature, and I'll take those photographs and I will print them, combining them with paintings that I've scanned into Photoshop, and I combine the two of them and I print them on my handmade paper, like with a big printer, and then I paint back on top of it with gouache paint. And so it's all of those things are happening into the paper at once, and I kind of want it to be balanced. It's like photography and actual flowers. So when you look up close, you'll see sections which are flowers. I don't know, can you see them? The little tiny flowers and leaves? And so there's little parts that are, say, an actual flower, and then a leaf, like a real leaf. And they're balanced with a photograph of a flower and a photograph of a leaf, but also paint and like the mess of paint, which is that same impulse that I had as a kid. Like everything is kind of jumbling together. And on the surface, you can see they're waxy. So I use encaustic, which is beeswax that comes from a natural thing also, and damar resin. They're combined together, and damar resin is from a plant, from a tree. It's actually like a sap that comes from the tree. So that surface just kind of blends all those mediums together and kind of protects it, like gives it kind of a I don't know, a density, but also a magicalness to it. So when we were hearing like the statement, it was like, it's beautiful, and I'm like being very positive about the garden and all of that. But I was actually just reading about the tornado that hit Joplin, because I was like, what's Joplin's history? So I went through, I'm like, that's like one of the #1 things. And you know, I live in Arkansas. I've also seen like the wreckage of tornadoes, although they've never impacted me personally. I've gone after and seen what it is. And so I have a sense of nature that's both beautiful and delicate, like I was explaining with the petals, but also nature that's like immensely destructive really quickly and like violent in a way that we have no power over. And I always kind of want my work to have a little feel of both of those, where you're both like enchanted and like a little bit afraid. And some of these pieces, I would say the pieces in this show are less the fear. I have other more fearful pieces, but summer I wanted it not to be like that. But I would say, you know, like the fire pieces have a little bit more of that sense of the changing and the drama and that kind of thing. So yeah. Does anybody have questions? Are we allowed to take questions now?
More of a statement than a question.
Uh-huh.
I would say the infinite definition of the circle of life is, in order to recreate, you must destroy.
Yeah.
Even if it's devastating, that just means there could be more creation if it's allowed due to non-obstructions.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's one of the things about fire is that
Fire is a good example.
it lets life again.
Instant carbonization of the land, and it can reform.
Yeah. And paper is that too. So paper can be recycled over and over and over again. So like you can just make it into mush and then remake it. I've done that. I've actually burned my artworks and then made paper with the ashes in them. And I've made paper with old artworks that I didn't like that I made into paper again. So that it had all of that kind of energy of the cycles too.
It's also cardboard's made most manufacturing companies.
And
They burn old paper and they return the cardboard.
And it's also made from trees, which is, you know, my paper is made from cotton and kozo, which is the mulberry tree, and I grow both of those things at my house. Cotton has a really complicated history here, but the mulberry maybe less so. They're both very beautiful materials. Yeah.
Out of all the paintings that you have brought here, which is your favorite? I know because I'm sure all of them are very sentimental to you.
Like if I could only pick one to keep and then all the other ones had to go. I can tell you which ones. So I have keep hanging this one up in my house because it's the shaped panel. It's the only shaped one here, and I'm not sure. It's like a question. So I don't know if it's my favorite. Do you know sometimes as an artist you like, are you an artist? Do you make stuff?
I'm not a painting artist. So.
Okay, but you have questions. So like sometimes it's the questions that we don't have answers to that are the most interesting to us. So I think that piece is still a question for me, whereas some of the other things are more resolved. I personally, I really love this piece. I like the fireworks. I understand people don't want to necessarily decorate their house with fires, but I often hang the fires in my own house.
That could also be a really good, like, pun type metaphor if you really wanted to mess with somebody. I've got fires all in my house.
I've got fires in my house.
I wasn't lying.
Yeah. A lot of those were made too when,
Ironically,
you what?
that one also is ironically my favorite because you turn art into art, which is kind of ironic. Redundantly funny in a sense. Like, not only is the artwork on it, but it's on another piece of artwork. So
Yeah.
That's pretty deep.
Thanks. Okay. Well, you can always ask me questions again later, and then when we talk about our own relationship too. Hey, Jessica.
Okay, if you want to take any pictures, I try to take a couple. Hi, I'm Jessica Mongeon, and thanks for being here today.
Thank you.
So I'm going to talk about my work. This series is based on my experiences of motherhood. The series that I did before this was a series called Lichen Neuron, and I think I need to talk about that first before I talk about this series. And what I did was I brought together human neuron imagery and lichen, mushrooms, and I was thinking about fractals and repeating patterns in nature and how the patterns in the human body echo the patterns in nature. So the branching of the neurons is similar to a branching river or tree branches, or even the way that little tiny lichen connect and have symbiosis. So from there, I started this series, and I was thinking about what to do next, and I had my first child at the beginning of the pandemic, and that was very difficult, and it changed me as a person and what I was thinking about. So I ended up doing this series using a print of my placenta from birth that I saved. So a lot of mothers save the placenta, which is an organ that your body produces to nourish the child. And obviously it's not needed after you have the child and you also birth the placenta. This is something that mothers often do, is when they save the placenta, they might make a print of it. So you basically press a piece of paper onto it, and it makes an imprint of the blood on it. And I had these prints. I didn't know what I was going to do with it, but I knew that when I was going to have my child, I would save the prints and make art from it somehow. So I took those and made them into a silk screen in order to kind of abstract it a little bit. I didn't want it to be like too literal, so I made the silk screen and then made a series of paintings based on that. And I also did some series based on photos that I took of the placenta, like laid out on the table. And so these these three over here have the prints of the placenta. So this is actually life-size scale. I just traced it from the print. So this one and this one's actually traced from the print, and this one's from the silk screen. And I kept repeating that image and thinking about how it really looked like lichen on a rock or something like that. And I wanted to make it green so that it wasn't that initial kind of, grossness factor of an organ and the human body. Sort of, people don't always want to look at that kind of thing. So I wanted to really camouflage it with nature, and I think it could be interpreted as many different things. I know someone thought it was a horseshoe crab before, especially that one. And thinking about this, imprint as a record of nourishing a child and being a part of the cycle of life. So that's this series, and this one over here also has the placenta prints, but they're more camouflaged. This piece is inspired by, or was influenced by the pandemic. So it's called First Breath, and I was thinking about a child's first breath when they're born, and then also about people's last breath, especially thinking about the pandemic where people were having so many issues with breathing. And this was one of the few times I got out of the house. There was a really beautiful sunset when I was driving home, and there were some trails from the airplanes, so that's what these are. And I have some imagery of inside someone's lungs, like the veins in your lungs, and these are the little air masses in your lungs. And I was looking at those anatomy images. So we have the lung anatomy, and I have mushrooms, which to me relate to the end of life more so, because mushrooms are breaking down nutrients to continue the cycle of life. And then, of course, the placenta prints, which is more about birth. So sunrise is the birth, and then if it's a sunset, that's more like the end of life. So those ones really are in a group, and this one is part of that too. This is more just the rainbow bracket fungus mushrooms. So bringing together the mushrooms and the placenta images. I do really like how that one turned out, because I went more representational on the mushrooms, and I feel like I created a good sense of depth with this piece. And this one is acrylic gouache on Arches paper. So acrylic gouache is very similar to acrylic, but it's more opaque and not as shiny. I really like the effect of that, and I like it a little better than using watercolor, because watercolor is so transparent, and it does reactivate when you get water on it again, so it's hard to build the layers. So that's why I like to use that medium. This one over here is also a placenta-inspired painting, and I was thinking about our connection with water and how our bodies are mostly made up of water, and a baby, when it's in the womb, is floating around in water. And so I made it look kind of like an ocean scene with the little white things are tiny mushrooms that I painted onto it. And I made the placenta image more abstract, but it has a pretty visible umbilical cord on the end. And I was still working from that same source image of my placenta. And the rounded forms could be interpreted different ways, but I think of them sort of as mushrooms or maybe sea plants. It ended up being a little more watery looking than I expected. I like creating a sense of depth with color and using more vibrant colors than you would see in real life. So let me go to, I think I'm going to cover all the placenta ones first. This is a more direct painting from the photo I took of my placenta, but it's larger than life. Definitely larger than life, obviously. If I stand in front of it, you would know that. But I did change the colors to be more like a scientific illustration rather than realistic. And I thought it would be interesting to make it into multiple panels rather than one large piece. And I was thinking a bit about the dangers of childbirth and how after you have a baby, the doctor has to inspect the placenta to make sure there are no pieces missing, because if any piece is left in the mother, she can get a really bad infection and die. So that is what I was thinking about when I did this piece. But I think it kind of looks like a cell or something like that. Like it looks interesting. There are a lot of really tiny details, and just thinking about that this was created over the period of 9 months, like this whole fairly large organ with all these tiny parts, and then after you have the baby, it's like, you know, gone. And so I'll talk about this one next, even though it's the most recent piece that I did. This is hollyhocks and milk duct and mammary gland anatomy together. So this, when I was thinking about how to reflect on breastfeeding and motherhood and pregnancy, I was thinking about nursing and all of the scientific processes that allow nursing to happen and how it makes us part of nature. So I was looking at these illustrations of milk ducts and thinking about how they look like flowers, and so I started doing this series where I combined them with the flowers and made them seem like they were part of the bouquet. So there are a couple different types of illustrations, more of a 3D rendering looking one, and then more of a flat side view of the milk ducts. And hollyhocks are really special to me because we had them at our house growing up, and they were planted by my great-grandmother, I think, and they just kept coming up year after year. So just thinking about the maternal line and the connection between a person and their mother's mother, and how that is important. And it also is important in my relationship with my sister, because we always played with hollyhocks and we would make them into little ladies. We'd take the seed pods and make that the head, and then connect it with a stick to the flower part and make little ballerinas. And we have a picture where we made necklaces and head dresses with them, little headbands. So I plan to do more like this, and I do have some others that are smaller. They're more like watercolors. So let's go over here. I think I covered all of these pieces. These two are from the series Making Time, and I created them while I was pregnant with my second, and I was taking care of my first a lot of the time. So I didn't have, and also working because I am an art professor, I didn't have a lot of time to work on my art, but I wanted to make something. So I thought of the idea to make a grid and complete a series. I think I tried to do 4 squares a day, and I would document them and put them on Instagram. And this is the second one that I did, and this I wanted to do all in muted pastel colors. low saturation. And it's sort of a spring theme. I have many plants and some abstract images, pretty much whatever I felt like painting that day that wasn't going to take a long time is what I did. And so it's a record of time and also a testament of just making time for what you want to do, even if you feel like you can't do it. Because you can, it just might not be in the way that you would like to. For example, doing a large painting like this, where you need to have big stretches of time. And the one behind you is also from that series, and that's the first one I did. More saturated colors, and I actually let my son paint on it a little bit. Some of the side parts are painted by my son, and you can kind of see where it goes outside the border. That's the part that he painted when he was about 2. And I just really had fun with it and tried out different shapes and patterns and blending of the watercolor. And this one is a collaboration with my son when he was 2 years old, and he did the whole background pretty much. All of the pen lines and pencil scribbles were all him, and then I just went over it with some streaks of color and filled in some of the background, and then I painted the pansies. And I think of the pansies as being little children or something like that. I think there's a movie where the pansies, maybe a Disney movie, where there are pansies that are little people or something like that. And I think it's really fun, and I think it would be fun to do more collaborations with my kids, although I really like my son's paintings now that he's 3. I don't really want to add anything to them because I just want to save them for what they are and have them be his own art. So I'm not sure if I'll continue doing a whole lot more either, but I have a 10-month-old, so I can always do collaborations with her because she started painting a little bit too, and I'm sure she'll get to the point where she's scribbling with crayons. All right, so should we talk a little bit about our work together, Melissa?
Yeah, can I say something about
yes.
that? I just realized, like, we have a few other connections and stuff we'll talk about, but I was thinking about motherhood and the role of mothering and, like, mothering and art and all of these ideas have come up. And, you know, my art was influenced by my mom. Like, she was the one who brought the canvas in, and she and I did co-drawings when I was growing up, like, where you both drew on things. And so I think it's interesting just to think about what that means to have this kind of collaboration. And so much of mothering is about giving up a bit of yourself, like, or a lot of yourself, and it's a really often a very selfless act, and it is very intense. And when you haven't done it, you don't really realize how intense it is. But one of the roles of artists, I think, is to acknowledge all of those things that are really present in your life and impacting your life. I will say, just as far as my process, I have had Afton sit there with mulberry bark and scrape mulberry bark off. There's videos that I, like, force him to, like, help me with my stuff. But aside from that, he doesn't make my work. So Jessica and I are both Northerners and came here, came to the South for different reasons. And but met because we started an art critique group of other women, and we're in that group together. And we also live within half an hour of each other. And I think, you know, we are impacted by the people and the conversations and the art we see, and we share a community. Arkansas has a fairly small but like helpful art community. I don't know if that's true.
Well, I think that the more accurate term would be you started the group, or you and some friends started the group, and then you took me in when I moved to Arkansas.
Yes, we adopted you.
Yes, so yeah, Melissa was very welcoming to me when I moved to Arkansas, and yeah, I'm glad we became friends.
Yeah,
so.
yeah, me too.
But yeah, we think this series goes really well together because we're of course the nature theme, but I think that we both think about color in a similar way, and also we're kind of along the line of following, we're in between abstraction and representation, right? Because there's some areas that are representational, you can tell what it is, but there's some areas that are more, you could say, painterly or abstract, and we're both using color as a tool, I think, to speak to people on a visceral level.
Yeah, I agree with that. We have similar impacts within art history too.
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking about those two pieces over here. The titles are really interesting. I didn't realize what the titles were, but my title is Whispers Borrowed, and hers is First Breath, and they're both about the body's experience of a space, of nature, of like becoming. And both of them were made during the pandemic, when we were thinking about breathing a lot and we were wearing masks all the time. Actually, all of the art probably in this room was made during that time.
Or I guess, yeah.
Or a little bit after. And I was reading some art criticism that said, like, even if you're making flower paintings or abstraction, you know, these times are going to impact your art, and they're going to show up in these ways. And I can see that both in the title and for me, I was doing interiors of other people's houses before this, and was doing like window scenes, and then I couldn't go into one's house, so then I had to just be outside a lot or by myself. And you turned into your like this whole process of becoming a mother, and very eternal, like going back into yourself too. So for a lot of us, I think it became a time where we like had to deal with something that was just us, not the outside world.
I agree. Questions? I guess I didn't take time for questions after my talk either. Yes.
I think both y'all's art both goes hand in hand in a way, especially because hers is called breath that's been like whispers being borrowed. That makes a good point, because yours symbolizes in my deep brain, which I surprisingly have. No joke. Yours has the beginning of life. Hers resembles the end of it. Considering you all seem to be very close friends, and kind of corresponds as a perfect circle, as I mentioned earlier.
Thanks.
In order for life to begin, it has to end. Which is sad, but that's how new life is spawned.
Yeah, you know, coming from a place, we're both very connected to nature as kids, and I imagine a lot of you would be too. Just when I keep driving in here, there's just big sky and fields, and all of that just totally impacts you for years ahead. And I mean, nature's been a huge inspiration for artists for a long time, so it makes sense. And that's one of the reasons the title's called Cyclical Nature. So that idea of these like cycles, and both within our body and outside of our body. Makes sense. Yeah, thank you for coming and listening to us yabber on.
Thanks.
I'm sure we could talk more.
Thank you.
So we do have some food. And then we can ask more
Melissa, I
Yeah.
just realized that this is rotated.
It's the wrong direction?
Yes,
Oh,
I put
that's
it up myself
hilarious.
too.
While you're like making your art, or while you're hanging
I might
out.
have to rephotograph that one.
Actually makes so much more sense.
Yes,
I was wondering about the placenta, and it just stopped.
right?
Yeah,
I-
or the umbilical cord.
I don't know why.